All right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call board members. Mark. You're here. I'm here. And Ron? Angie?
President,
Okay, Mr. Anderson will not be present tonight. He sat down in his chair and can't get up, and I don't know if he hurt his back or his wife kicked him. So he will not be here. But we do have a quorum, so we'll proceed with the meeting. I'd like to get a motion and a second to approve the board member meeting, the meetings of the board on 4/12/23.
The minutes. I move we approve the 4/12 minutes.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna go a little out of order. We're gonna go with the agenda, but we're gonna take a special guest first. We have tonight with us a special guest. But first I'd like to make everybody's attention that we will not take any comments or any questions for this presentation. Any questions can be emailed to the office, and due to our limited staff in the office, one question per person. And we'll post the responses on the web in a few weeks as soon as we get the time. And we'd like all the emails in by close of business on Friday, May 12th. Okay, now, I'd like to introduce Jenny Anderson, who is our special guest tonight. And we also have Supervisor Bishop with us. Thank you.
Not special, but I'm here.
Jenny is the clerk of the board for the County of Mojave Supervisors. Her duties are, she does the agenda, takes the minutes, she kind of keeps the board in line maybe a little bit. And she's also the go-to person for the open meeting law questions throughout the board. This presentation is part of the board's requirements to review the open meeting laws once a year. Usually we do it with on video, but we're real happy to have Jenny here in person. So we're gonna go sit down there so we can watch her, and and we can pay a little better attention to her.
got enough paperwork there.
Okay, so here is, unless you can go along and keep it, whatever you do.
Because you should always start.
Thank you.
One.
And then, I also made copies for you guys, for anybody who's here, if you guys want one. If you want to follow along or anything, so.
Thank you.
Is that one for Jean?
What?
That one you have?
No, that's the one I have my notes on. But there's,
Same thing?
it's the same thing, they're just not.
I'll take that one to my hand.
They're just, but it is the same thing. Thank you for coming. Thank you. So the PowerPoint that I use is the same one that the Ombudsman Office uses. They present this when they do the open meeting law training for clerks. So same information. So it kind of starts off like, what is the role of the ombudsmans? Well, their role is to, follow up if there's complaints or make sure people are following the open meeting law if people are making complaints. They do the investigations, anything along that line. Sometimes they'll send letters out sometimes to say, hey, make sure you're following this if they get complaints. So they are a very busy office though, so they struggle sometimes with follow-up, or sometimes it takes them a while, so just be aware of that. So starting off with, a lot of people ask, what is open meeting law? Some people have no clue. And basically what it's intended to do is to ensure that any public body, so any board, any subcommittee boards that so if our board appoints a board, any of those type of boards have to follow open meeting law. So it makes sure that all deliberations, proceedings, votes, any business is done in the public eye. Now, there's only one small exception to that, and that's if something is a legal matter and it's done in executive session. There are other rules for that. But overall, what's on your agenda should be done open and public. So that's basically what it is. And then the second slide is basically who must comply, and it's any public body. So any elected board, anything like that. And the next slides, and I'm not going to read you every single slide because that gets really boring. So I'm going to touch on the most important things that really apply to everyday meetings that you guys hold. Because it'll go into more definition of what kind of committees and what kind of, and probably for your board, you're not going to run into too much of that. So, but it's there if you want the information. So the next step is statutory requirements of who's required to have training or follow trainings, or so for me, because I'm a clerk of the board for the county, I also have to post the actual open law meeting handbook, like the one that when you read it you go, what did that just say, kind of thing. So on my website at the county, there's actually a link where you can actually read the legalese type open meeting law handbook. So always that's available there if you ever want to look at it. Every person who's elected or appointed to a public body is required prior to taking office, by 1 day prior to taking your office, you are supposed to have read the open meeting laws. They don't. The bad part to that is you run into people who don't do it because there's no follow-up. There's no thing you fill out, there's no test, there's no. So it's kind of one of those sticky areas that they tell you have to do it, but not everybody does it. So it's always good to follow up with yearly trainings or anything like that. So just as an FYI, if somebody ever asks, make sure your new board members are reading it. Okay, so let's see. Again, the enforcement authority is the Ombudsman's office. They have a team it's called OMLET because it's the Open Meeting Law Enforcement Team. So it's OMLET. And they do the investigations. They have enforcement authority if somebody is violating. They basically put out the handbook that has the open meeting law. And technically, the county attorney's office or any court can also hold somebody liable if they're not following the law. So then you get into what must your public body do? You must have a notice of a meeting. You must have an agenda. You must meet in public. You do have to permit public to attend with the exception of the executive sessions we talked about. You have to take all your actions in front of the public. And then after the meeting, you have to create meeting minutes. So those are just things that absolutely have to be done. Most of the time, your notice and your agenda are kind of the same thing in most cases, so that kind of takes care of those. So what is a meeting? A meeting is any gathering in person, or if you were to use a Zoom meeting or things of that nature, that has a quorum of your public body. So if, two of you are having lunch, that's not a meeting. You don't have to post it, you don't, but if you're conducting business and there's 3 or more of you, you have to do it in a setting that's open to the public.
Can I comment? What about in this small of a town? I was on the council
Sure.
where I came from. You always run across each other at public functions and all that stuff. So how do you avoid? There, they told us we just post to the thing that we might meet.
So posting. It's 2 things. Number one, and I get that because we run into that all the time. People go to the same events. People go to the same. So as long as you're not talking about business, you don't ever want to you're out to dinner and there happens to be 3 or 4 of you and you're like, hey, what did you think about this and what are your feelings on that? You have to stay away from those topics because ultimately if somebody overhears you, that is a violation. However, it is a courtesy to post when you're going to be at events. So while it's nice, like if you're like, well, there's going to be a meeting in Kingman and we know for a fact that 4 people are going to it. It's always nice to post a notice that these people are going to be there, but they're not there on behalf to talk about our business. But it is not a law that you have to. It is a courtesy
That's the
posting.
same as you call it.
Yeah, so. Let's see. And then it kind of goes into a little bit more about what is a meeting, because that also, you have to be careful that, especially now as we move into the age where there's a lot of electronic devices, you can't get on like your iPad and FaceTime this gentleman who then FaceTimes this gentleman. Okay, you're having a meeting now if you're talking about business.
Sure.
So you have to be a little bit careful with that. It's changed over the years because of the new technology. So that kind of just explains that you can't exchange those things in any fashion, whether it's email, phone calls, that's a quorum and you're talking about it. There's a list here of how many people equals a quorum. So in a 5-member board, the quorum is 3, even if you have vacancies on your board. So say there's 5 openings, but you're only filled with 4. Your quorum is still 3. It's however many board members are set, okay? Let's see. And then I don't know if you guys do any remote meetings. So if you were holding them somewhere else, or you were, like I said, sometimes they do them on Teams or Zoom or electronically. Board members and the public have to be able to hear it. So if, say there was a screen here and a couple of you called in, or you were having a meeting that where, like sometimes we have meetings, if they're special meetings, only one of my board members is sitting in the auditorium, everybody else is on the phone. But we have to hold that somewhere where they all can hear and participate and the public can come listen. So always keep that in mind, that you have to make sure that's done. And then if you're doing it that way, it has to indicate that on your agenda. And then also when you do your minutes, you have to say, this person was in person, this person was on the phone, it has to be very clear. So your initial notice, so for us, our initial notice is technically our agenda, but we do a calendar every year. So it tells you on every first and third Monday, with the exception of if Monday's a holiday. So that's a notice to everybody in the county. We're gonna have a meeting twice a month. So it's always nice to do. So towards the end of the year, I put together a calendar for the next year, the board approves it, and then there's your notice. We're gonna have all these meetings. It's great, people know.
Can I ask, is that enough of a notice? Does that mean that you don't have to post agendas then?
No, that's
Okay, I didn't
just-
think so.
That's just an initial
'Cause,
notice.
yeah, we do the calendar too.
Yeah,
but-
so,
okay.
but it's nice because then people can't go, I didn't know you were having a meeting, you're like, oh, you did, so,
Yeah.
And then it goes into basically notice of meetings, which technically is your agenda, does have to be posted at least 24 hours in advance of a meeting. So,
Yeah, yeah.
that can include Saturday only if the public has access to your agenda on the weekend. For us at the county, we don't count it that way. For me, my 24 hours is Friday. Like Friday at 9 o'clock, because our executive session started at 9 o'clock on Monday. After that, nothing goes on the agenda. The agenda cannot change, and that's it. It's set, no matter what. Because ours are posted, they are posted online, but our hard copy is posted in our building, and our building is not open. So someone has to be able to see it if you include Saturday. The only thing where 24 hours does not come into play is if you have an actual emergency. So say your water lines all blew up and you guys got to come to the board to say we got to get these fixed. That's an actual emergency. You know, it can't just be, well, I forgot to put that on the agenda. That's not an emergency. So always keep that in mind. The contents of your notice, which would be like I said, ours is technically our agenda. It does have to have the name of the public body, the date, the time, the place, address, if there's a room number. It has to say, and this is why I just say it's an agenda. Some people will do a notice and then an agenda, but you're kind of doing double work if you do that. So it should include also your agenda and the items on your agenda. Posting your notice. So it has to be posted in a location identified in your initial notice. Like when you, so for us, I do the calendar, and then I also do something that's on the board's letterhead that basically says, these are the meetings scheduled for the year, and it has the list of the meetings, and then it says the agenda will be posted at these places. So like ours is the website and our county building. We also post, I think, in our libraries and some of the supervisors' offices, but those are courtesy postings. So whatever you tell the public, this is where our posting will always be, your posting has to be there, no matter what. Like, so if you say a website and this building, it always has to be here. Anywhere else is just extra. So, so we have to post on websites. Special districts do not, because not every special district has a website. If you do, you should be posting there as well. So that's the one exception is special districts. And then tips for posting notice, obviously make sure it's not easily removed or the rain is going to wash it away or anything like that. If you're posting front and back, make sure it all can be read. You know, you're posting both sides of it. And again, it's just make sure it's a regular practice. For me, I post an agenda 1 week before our meeting, and then obviously if there's any revisions, we do it, but nothing past that Friday. So it's always good if you can, especially for your regular meetings, post at same day every time. So if you're having a Wednesday meeting and you post the week before, do it on Wednesdays. Because otherwise people don't know when to look for your agenda. Let's see what else. When you're in a meeting, you can recess during your meeting. So say you're having just a super long meeting and it's 8:30, you're thinking this, I'm tired. You can recess and reconvene at another time, and it can actually be, say, the next day if needed. But you do have to say, we're recessing until this date and time. And then you do have to reconvene when you say that. And it can be an hour break for dinner, it can be, but you do have to make it clear to the public who's participating in the meeting or attending the meeting. Emergency meetings, we kind of just touched on that. Again, it has to be an actual emergency, and then that can be the one exception to the 24-hour posting. So, and it kind of goes into a little more of the meeting requirements, but basically, unless it's really an emergency, don't do it. So it kind of just falls under that. I think in the 10 years I've been the clerk, we've had one. That's it. So it's not a common thing. So then it goes into what your question was, the social events and seminars. You can all attend them, just don't talk about business. And then again, if you are able to post something, if you know it's coming, it's a courtesy and it's always good practice. So, okay, the actual agenda. So your agenda is specific to what's discussed, considered, or is going to be decided upon. If it is not on your agenda, you do not talk about it. It's a no-no. I know it's tempting sometimes, especially because somebody might say, well, what about? You can't do it. Only what's on your agenda. When you do your agenda, anytime you list your items on agenda, you have to remember that the public doesn't always know what you know. So,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. So you have to remember that you guys kind of do this. So you know if like your staff has said, hey, these things are going on. The public doesn't know all of that. So if you're going to put something on the agenda, word it in a way, like I kind of follow the who, what, where, when, why type rule. So if somebody reads it, they're like, oh, I know what they're going to talk about. Make it easy, you know. You can use general categories, like new business, old business, reports. But even with those, you have to stay within a certain parameter. So you have to be a little bit careful with those to make sure you're not ending up going into an item that ends up being discussed. So you can give reports, you can say, like we have a legislative report on ours, where the board members will talk about what meetings they went to, things they did in the community, anything of that nature, and that's fine, but it can't roll into, well, I think we should vote on something else. You can't do that. You can just give a little spiel and that's it. Let's see, what else? So our county manager does kind of a county manager's report that can be current events like in our county. So since I'm really not sure how your district works, if you had a staff member that was coming to give you guys an update on something in your water district, they could also do that, but it does have to be agendized that someone's gonna come give a report. So, and if you're gonna just agendize it as a report, even if he comes and says, hey, that well needs to be replaced, it would have to be re-agendized to make a decision. So sometimes it's easier to just say, hey, we're gonna discuss this, gives the report, and it gives you the option. Yes,
The way we've been doing it is I do a manager's report at every meeting.
okay.
And occasionally there is a little bit of a conversation. Is that a no-no?
Conversation is fine, but if it's just agendized as like a report, then even no matter what you said, if you said the roof needs to be replaced, that's great. You've now told them the roof needs to be replaced, but then they could not say, okay, well, I make a motion that we spend $10,000 on the roof. Can't do that.
But you can put that on the agenda for the next meeting.
Yes, so you could say, oh, that's good to know. Make sure that's on the next agenda, and then you could take the action. So, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. But your report is fine, so that you're just reporting it to me.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Let's see, what else? So again, it says you cannot propose. It says discuss and deliberate. Discuss is, that term is used very loosely there, because like you said, you can listen to it and then you could say, like you could ask the question, so are you telling us the roof needs to be repaired? And if she said yes, then you would say, put it on the next agenda. So, so you can ask things like that, but just don't go deep into it, if that's all it was agendized for. Again, if it's not on your agenda, do not discuss it. Put it on for a future meeting. That's one of the biggest things that people get hit with on an open meeting law violation, is they discuss things that are not agendized. And if the public is watching, or if it's recorded and they go back and watch something, they're gonna go, I didn't know that was on the agenda. You will get reported. So that's a big one. Meeting locations always should be very accessible. Obviously your meeting location is accessible, so that probably wouldn't apply to you, but you should not be having meetings at your board members' houses, places like that. It needs to be a public building that the public can come into freely. Make sure there's enough room, people can hear you. Obviously this meets those criteria, so you're good on that one. Try not to have your board meetings at unreasonable times. In other words, don't plan it for 11:30 at night, because most of your public's not coming, or 6 in the morning, or things like that. So this is a good time to have your meetings. It's after work, people can come, it's easy to do. The next one is one that's not always really popular with people, but it is the public's rights. The public's right is to attend the meeting, listen to the meeting, tape record the meeting, they can videotape the meeting. The public does not have a right to speak or disrupt a meeting. And that's true of any open meeting. It is at a board's discretion. So with our board meetings, we have a consent agenda. Ours is a little different because we have public hearings. So that's where an exception is. But if we just have a consent agenda and a regular agenda, it is solely at the chairman's discretion with our board if he allows the public to speak on those items. So what I will say to that, though, is if you're going to allow the public to speak on these items, you have to be very consistent with it. You can't say, today we're going to let the public speak on the items and tomorrow we're not going to. It's better practice to keep it consistent, because otherwise you just run into problems. So either you're going to let people speak or you're not going to let people speak on your agendized items. Exceptions are public hearings. So we have like zoning issues, things of that nature that has to be published as a public hearing. We have to let people sign up to speak on those. If you have a call to the public, you have to let people speak at the call to the public because you've advertised that. But anything else on your agenda, you do not have to. So keep that in mind. And that kind of segues into your call to the public. It is optional. You do not have to have one. Our board chooses to have one. It gives people the opportunity to either voice their happiness with you, their displeasure with you, or say, hey, I'd like you to discuss something. So, you know, it's beneficial in all ways too. So it just kind of depends on how your board is set up. You can place time restrictions on it. Our board allows 3 minutes, and we tell people that. And you can time it. You can say 3 minutes. I typically will say, if we have our call to the public going on, Jean signed up for call to the public. We have a podium for it, so she'll approach the podium. Once she says, hi, I'm Jean Bishop from Kingman, boom, I start the timer. And then she talks for her 3 minutes. So that's kind of what I do to make it fair across the board. I do it with every single speaker so that no one can say, she got longer than I did, you started the timer before I started, you know, that kind of thing. I do it the same way every single time, and it just keeps it. If you're consistent all the time, it's fair and consistent all the time. You can require speakers, like if you had 10 people here to say the same exact thing. Some boards, I see very few boards that do it, will say, pick a spokesman, one person can speak. We do not do that. Our thought process on that is if the person traveled to your meeting, they get their 3 minutes. It's 3 minutes, you know? But it is legally, you can say, well, if all 5 of you are just gonna say the same thing, pick a spokesman. Not the best practice if you want people to like you, but, you know, not illegal. You can, though, prohibit disruptive behavior. Like it says, the public is here to attend. You do give them the ability to speak at a call to the public, but as the open meeting law states, they cannot disrupt your meeting at any time. So if someone's cussing you out, if they're screaming and yelling, if it interrupts the business flow, you can then say, okay, your time's up. However, you need to keep good notes on it if you do it, you know, like a good documentation of why, what, when, where, how, all that good stuff. And again, I would say, unless it's really bad, you know, people have the right to their opinions, unless they're becoming abusive. If they're becoming abusive and calling you names and cussing you out, that's a whole different story. So, again, some of the pitfalls to call to the public, you do have to be careful. Even it is the public's opportunity to bring up things that are not on the agenda, but you have to make sure you don't discuss things on the agenda. So, you know, Jean came up and she's not happy about her roads, and she went on and on and on about it at her call to the public. I could still look over, say at somebody and say, can you put that on the agenda? But you cannot have a discussion, not with the speaker and not with the board members. So always keep that in mind, because that sometimes it's hard not to engage, but you can't engage that way. So, and again, it lists, like you can ask staff to study a matter, put it on the future agenda. The one exception to the rule is you can respond to criticism, but you have to be very careful, because, you know, if I get up and I tell Jean, I don't like you, I don't like your shirt, I don't like your, she could respond and say, well, I think it's a nice shirt. But you've now opened up that dialogue, and it does. It's hard to contain it to this. So sometimes it's just easier to say thank you for your comments. It just spares the whole back and forth so that you don't break the open meeting law. Meeting etiquettes during your meetings. You should not pass notes to each other. You should not be texting each other. Whispering, you know, like somebody will lean over. That's not good. The idea of this meeting is so that the public can hear everything that you're doing. They have the right to hear the business you're conducting. So that's usually a no-no. The other thing to be careful with before a meeting starts, I get it. You're all here, you're sitting down. Of course you can talk to each other. Hey, how were you today? That kind of stuff. Be careful not to start talking about your items on the agenda prior to your meeting starting. Like, don't lean over and go, hey, what do you think about number 4? Don't talk about the agenda till you start your meeting. Because that's one that's hard to remember sometimes because it's just so tempting. You know, you're like, hey, not a good practice and not allowed. Executive sessions. I don't know, do you guys hold executive sessions?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
We are now.
Okay. So obviously the public cannot be in your executive session. They're only permitted for specific matters, and they are actually listed by statute, which the statute is listed there. Most of the time it's for legal advice is the most common one. We've done them, according to the statute, we've done them for like property sales. You do them for personnel issues. I think those are the 3 top ones we've done them for, but there's like 9 reasons why you can hold one. Most common one is your legal advice. You do have to, so every meeting that we have, one of the first things we do on our agenda is we set an executive session for every single meeting, whether we're having one or not, because we don't always know yet. However, you have to set the possibility of one if you're going to hold it. Like our technical meeting starts at 9 o'clock, 9:30. Every meeting we set a public, I'm just messing this all up. We set an executive session for 9 o'clock so that if there's legal advice, the attorney wants to give a legal advice on an item on an agenda or anything of that nature, our meeting then starts at 9. So we have an item that says set a executive session for 9 a.m. and it's always our next meeting date. So it's always on the front of our agenda. So if something comes up between that meeting and this meeting that has to be addressed in executive session, we're free to do so. So, or you can also, we also have a blurb on there that says any items starred may be heard in executive session. So, you know, if there's that possibility, and then there's another little thing that says, according to the executive session statute, say it's an item on the agenda and you didn't know you were going to need legal advice, but something comes up and you can then you can say, well, according to ARS 38-43103, we're going to go into executive session for legal advice. But all these things are posted on the front of my agenda that these things can happen. So it's always a good practice to put more out there, and if it doesn't happen, great. You know, you're covered regardless. You do have to vote to enter your executive session. So if you're in a meeting and you say, okay, this item is started for executive, we're now going to go into executive, then somebody has to say, I make a motion to go into executive session, you have a second, you vote, you go in. So you have to kind of put it on the record that you're going into executive session. The discussion that happens in there is confidential. If you have an attorney in there, they should be telling you that as well. You cannot take action in executive session, so you can't vote in executive session. You can give staff direction, but you cannot vote. So even if you've been given direction by your county attorney and it's something you have to vote on to have them, say, file a lawsuit, when you come out and it gets, you know, you take action on it, I mean, it can just be, I make a motion to do as directed or as suggested in executive session. So you don't have to come out and tell everybody what it was, but you do have to make a motion. And that has to be in public. So I know it's tricky sometimes, but that's the law. The motion has to be done in public. And then your executive sessions do have to have minutes. We don't record ours, obviously, because you don't want a video of it, because then people can play it. But you do have to keep minutes because the Auditor General's office can come in and ask to see them. The only people who are privy to executive session minutes are people who are in the executive session or the Auditor General. Anybody else cannot view your executive session minutes. They're that way because it's usually legal advice, things of that nature. So, but you do have to have them because, believe it or not, after like 3 or 4 years I was in my office and I got a thing from the Auditor General. They're like, we want to see these from like 2 years ago. I had to produce it. So you never know when they're going to ask for them. So just keep that, you know. Then it goes into the notice on your agenda. Like I just said, it's always good practice to say, we can do this if we need legal advice. It's just a little thing on the front of your agenda. So you do have to tell people it can happen. Anyone attending your executive session, obviously you're members of the public body. If you're having a personnel discussion, obviously the person you're discussing should be, you can have them come in. Your auditor general can come into it if they chose to. I've never had one come to sit in one. And anybody who's reasonably necessary. So if your attorney says, hey, you're being sued for something with your water line or something, and you're going, well, that's Bob's job to take care of that when he's out there. Well, then you can say, well, we need Bob to come in and explain why that happened. So he would be necessary for that executive session. But you can't just say, but you know what, I think Steve would like to hear this too. Well, if Steve's not involved, Steve can't come in. It has to be people directly involved in your executive session. In your minutes, you should also put, if it's somebody outside of your board or your attorney or that kind of thing, note in your minutes, why did Bob show up? Bob was here because of this reason. That kind of thing. So that it shows why they were in there. Some of the pitfalls to having an executive session, you have to be careful that you make people understand. You can't come out of executive session and talk about it with anybody else. If you have a guy that's doing that, you have a problem. And don't take any legal action. Sometimes it's very tempting. Don't do it. Don't do it because it's a no-no. So, personnel matters, you can discuss employment, assignments, promotions, demotions, dismissal, salaries, disciplines, and it can be for an officer, an appointee, an employee of the board, but you have to be able to identify who that person is in your minutes. It has to be someone who's directly related to you.
Can you come out of the executive session and vote on, or do you have to put that on the agenda for a next meeting?
Usually because your executive session is something that's already agendized,
Okay.
you would be able to take
You can
action.
come out.
Now if it's, we always agendize something that's gonna be an executive session, so we don't run into that. And we actually have, if you look at the front page of our agenda, it'll say official business to become before the board. Number 1 just says, contemplation of any legal claims and litigation, so it's very, we usually don't use it very often because usually we do agendize an actual item, but that gives your attorney a little bit of leeway if something came up last minute. Better to agendize if possible though. And again, you don't have to put all the details because we have some that'll say Mojave County versus whoever, case court number, for advice from the attorney. So obviously you're not going to tell anybody what you're going to talk about, but at least it's on there that, hey, we're going to go into executive session and talk about this. So that covers your, and then you can come out and make motions on that item. Let's see. And then it kind of goes into some different things to consider regarding personnel matters, because you do have to notice somebody if it's a personnel issue. So you can't just, you can agendize it, but you have to tell that person, hey, we're going to have this item and we may go into executive session. You can give them the executive meeting law statute. I usually print that out for them. And we actually have a form letter that says you're going to be discussed at this meeting on this item on this date. That way they can decide. That person can say, I want to have these discussions in public. They do have the right to say that. I only one time have I ever run across someone who says, I want you to talk about me in public. It didn't turn out so great for them because everybody knew all their business then. Most people want to meet with you in an executive session. So if you were trying to fire Gene, and you had your executive session, you would either come out of executive session and you could either make a motion to demote Gene, or you could make a motion to fire Gene, or you could take no action and Gene just keeps her job. But you do have to do that part in public, even if they request a private discussion. Let's see, confidential information. So anything that's coming from your attorney or anything that's confidential of that nature should be marked confidential. Make sure your board members know this is not to be shared. You can discuss confidential information as long as your attorney tells you you can in an open public meeting. Obviously, if it's regarding someone you're suing or something like that, you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to tell them what you're doing. But you have to be very careful and listen to your attorney on what should be discussed if it's confidential. Let's see. You cannot discuss among yourselves like the action to take, or you can't sit in there and say, well, how are you going to vote? And how are you going to vote? And how are you going to vote? No, that's supposed to be done in public. So be careful. I mean, it's okay to say, like if we're talking about something and you say, I don't really like that. You know, you can have conversation, but you shouldn't go around the room and then ask everybody how they're going to vote. That's polling your board. That's an open meeting law violation. Everybody has their own mind. You know how you're going to vote. That's determined when someone makes a motion in a second. So just kind of be careful, because it's hard sometimes in the course of discussions. But you have to be really careful with that. Again, other reasons for executive session: litigation, contract negotiations, settlements, obviously personnel issues, tribal negotiations. There's kind of a little bit of things, but usually your attorney's going to tell you what that is. So I always suggest listen to your legal advice. Let's see, there were new things that came out this year, and some of them were school safety and plans. Like new plans come out now for cyber attacks. These are things you can discuss in private because you obviously don't want the hackers to know what your cyber plan is. So these were new things that were added as things have been happening. Obviously, as more school shootings happen, you don't want to tell everybody what your plan is. Those are new things that are allowed to be discussed in executive sessions. So those were just new things in 2020 that were added. Minutes. Who does your minutes?
Me.
That's you. Okay. They're so much fun.
Okay.
So minutes or a recording is required. So we do both. We have a recording that we post on our website. However, we also have typed minutes.
Yep.
We do have both. It covers you both ways. It's great. The statute says that your minutes have to be available to the public within 3 days. So there is a get around on a full minute being out there. We don't post our actual minutes until our board approves them. And a lot of our minutes take all week to type because they like to talk. So, sometimes they're 4 or 5 hours long. But we do an action agenda. So on my website, usually that day or by the next morning, so usually within 24 to 48 hours, you can go back, and it's basically my agenda, and underneath each item in red, it'll say if the item was approved, not approved, or if they made some crazy motion, anything. It's there with who made the motion in the second and the vote.
So the video isn't enough. It actually has to be in writing too?
It depends on who you talk to. This is where the law is not crystal clear. So some attorneys will tell you it has to be in writing. Some attorneys will tell you the video covers you. I do both. So I have a video that's posted, and then I do the action agenda because it doesn't necessarily have to be the typed verbiage that has to be there, just the action of the board.
Within 3 days.
Within 3 days. So we post our action agenda so that anybody can look. Did they approve this, not approve this? It's clear. If they really want to hear what they said, they can still look at the video. And then at the next meeting, because ours usually we have a meeting, we have 2 weeks to complete the minutes, and then they're on an agenda, and then they get posted. So then you could have the whole written, but they're very long. Our minutes are usually 100+ pages long, so they take a little time. So That's why I post the action agenda. And then that way, if somebody doesn't want to watch the video, they can still see the action taken by the board and I'm covered. So it's kind of a nice way while you're preparing the minutes and getting the minutes approved. So, and some, I don't know that I've ever really met a board that can do them in 3 minutes, but you know, like I'm like, wow, you got all those out, but it's hard. But the action agenda takes just a few minutes to do and you're done. And then you have time to do your minutes. So it's a good way to cover both sides of that. It also is nice to have the typed action agenda because say your website's down or the internet's down or something like that. So I do both just in case. And then it kind of like, this repeats itself a little bit. It talks about content of public meetings. Well, with your minutes, it has to say that almost the same thing your agenda does. It has to have the date, the time, the place, who was there, who was absent, a general description of what was discussed. So obviously you're going to list every item and then you're going to kind of put what was discussed and what action was taken by your board. You do have to now, they changed this. So we used to do minutes, we'll say all 5 of them vote yes. I could put like these 2 people made a motion, a second, and it carried unanimously. They don't want that anymore. They actually want you to say, this person made a motion, this person seconded, and this person voted yes. This person voted yes. This person voted on every single item.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was an update they did, I want to say around 2020, 2021. And why, I don't know. Because obviously the person who put this into the legislation doesn't type minutes. I don't know. Because that's the only way I can look at it. Why would you ever say that? Because unanimous would obviously means all 5 voted yes. No, you have to put you're supposed to put this person voted this way, this person voted this way. So it's kind of a pain, but now I do not do that on my action agenda because I don't have to on that. I can just put a 5 and a 0, that kind of thing. But on your typed minutes, it should indicate each person.
So you don't publish draft minutes, you just publish?
No, we don't publish until they are approved.
Okay.
Now there are other boards that do. They'll put draft across it and still put it up. And if you can do that in 3 days, great. Again, ours are usually 100+ pages long and it's just impossible. So we do it that way.
Who's your publishing company?
Yeah. So something to remember. If somebody's making a presentation or comes up to present to your board or anything of that, make sure their names are in there. This is who presented. You know, obviously, it's an accounting of your meeting, so it's kind of common sense that these things should all go in there. And then obviously your legal action, so your votes and things of that nature. And this is the next page is your access to the meeting minutes. So 3 working days after the meeting, not after approval. So that's why I have an action agenda. So that covers me because there's no way they're typed in time.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it says minutes or a recording shall be up in 3 days.
it does. So if you have a recording, however, again, if your internet goes down, if your website's not working, if for whatever reason Jean cannot access that, you have to have something. So I do both. So that's why I do the action agenda, because it's easy for me to have both. It just kind of covers you no matter what. You know. The next part is cities and towns, so you don't really have to worry about that one. Do you guys ever do subcommittees at all, or is it pretty much you guys make all the decisions? Okay, so I won't bore you with that whole spiel about it's there. If you want to read it, it's great reading. Your executive session meeting minutes, it's kind of the same thing. You have to have the date, the time, the place, who was there, why they were there, who was absent. The difference with this is you can be a little bit more general in your description, but you do have to include if any instruction was given, like if the attorney said, I suggest you do this, you know, or this is make sure that's in there.
Right.
And again, those are kept confidential, just your board members, your attorney. I don't know, I guess for me it would be like county manager, so whoever would be that person.
Right.
Only that. They're not released to anyone else unless the auditor general asks for them. So, again, it goes into only members of the public body, officers that are involved, auditor general, your attorney, that kind of thing. The ombudsman office, obviously, if they wanted to see him, anybody of that nature.
Right.
things that come up would be circumvention of the open meeting law. Some people think that if you send him a text message and say, hey, you know, I think we should hire Jenny, she's great. And then you're like, yeah, I think so too. And then so you text him and you go, you know what, we were talking, I think Jenny's pretty great. Well, now you've kind of influenced a vote among 3 members. No. Just because it's a text message, just because it's a phone call, just because it's an email, it's still a violation. Also remember, if you do it in an email, so like, I know it's probably a little different for you guys, but for us, county email. So if I did that, if Jean did that and emailed a board member, and that person forwards that one to the next board member, and the next board member, they have violated the open meeting law. The public can do a public records request for those emails. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can. Like if you guys happen to be talking about it and somebody says, I heard them talking about that email. Don't do it. Just don't do it. You know, it's just bad practice and, you know, not supposed to happen. So always be careful of that. You also can't use staff to do the same thing. Jean can't call me and say, you know what I was thinking? I was thinking that, you know, we should hire this person or whatever the case may be. Do you think Hildy would want to know that? Why don't you call her? So then I call Hildy. That's a no-no as well. You cannot do that in any fashion. Yes. Don't use other people to do so. You will get caught because people like to talk. So,
Serial agenda.
Yeah, you just can't do it. Don't do it. So that's a big one too, that people, when they first come, they don't realize it. So, again, polling your members. As like, if you were the county manager, you can't go around to your board members and ask, will you vote for this if I put this forward? Will you vote for this? You can't do that. You cannot do it. If you have a great idea that you think is great, put it out there for discussion at a meeting. Don't poll your board members. Again, letters, emails, that kind of thing. Don't do it. Don't send them all to each other. Don't write a letter and mail it. Somebody's going to know you did it. Don't do it. Our board will send things like if Jean has information from a constituent, and she feels the whole board should see it, she sends it to me and says, can you please disseminate this to the board? It can't be anything that influences a vote, but it could just be that, you know, Bob wrote a letter about his road. He's not happy with his road, or his neighbor's got too much junk in his front yard, or it can be anything. We see all kinds of them. But if it's just a general letter, or if it's a letter regarding something on our agenda, but they only send it to one board member, they send it to me, I send it out. This prevents anybody from hitting reply all and saying something to the entire board. If they hit reply all, it's going to come back to me. So always be careful about things that go out and how they're sent out to your board members. Because somebody might accidentally hit reply all, and then they might be like, I think this is a great idea. Well, now all the board knows that. Use somebody to help you filter those. Let's see, what else? Again, it just shows the Attorney General's opinions on why you can't do those things, and that's really good reading too if you get time. It goes over the electronic communications. We always put a statement at the end of ours to ensure compliance with open meeting law. Recipients should not forward it to other members of the board, shouldn't reply to the message. It's always nice to have that on there. Doesn't mean that it won't happen, so we try not to have the board do that, but at least it says it. So sometimes it's nice to add that to the end of them. Again, your staff can send email to your board members, but you can't then use that as, they can send you information, but it should not turn into a discussion of the board. So no back and forth thing with board members as far as that goes. One-way communication. So even though it's not technically a quorum, there's like kind of a little wavy line there that's like you can't propose things to the next person. Like, I think we should, no, put it on an agenda. Like none of those communications should go back and forth. If you want something on an agenda, send it to the person that does your agenda. So there are some caveats to just one person communicating. Normally it's quorum, but depending on how something's worded, it can violate. So you have to be careful with what you're proposing to somebody. if you're both on the board. Let's see. And this is kind of more of proposing. You can't propose legal action outside of your board meetings. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it amongst each other. Don't email it, text it, anything. Proposed action and actions are here only. If you're asking her to put something on there, communicate the topic. Don't tell her what the legal action is. Like, don't be like, I think we should put this on the agenda because I want to pass it. You know, just, hey, put this on the agenda. So don't conduct business in your emails or communications is what it comes down to. There are a couple examples so that, you know, you can read through and view those. Again, staff and other people cannot circumvent for you. That's listed as well. Communications with the public. As board members, you can communicate with your public. You can talk about opinions. You can talk about things that happened at the meeting. We actually have a resolution in our county that says if the board took an action, even if you didn't agree with that action, say a vote was 3-2 and I didn't like it, I voted no for it. Basically, you can say, you know, I really wasn't in favor of that. However, the county is going to follow this. So you're free to do that. You're free to communicate your own opinions of something if you didn't vote for it. However, you're not supposed to turn around and say, and I think we should, you know, you're a cohesive board. Your board takes action as a board. Even if you didn't like it, you might have voted no. That is the action of the board. So, you know, and it kind of tells you what does that mean. Don't talk to the public about things that are going to be deliberated, or you know, you can tell them yes, that's going to be on the agenda, and yes, it's because the water thing broke or whatever. But don't start talking about. And I think we should pass a law that no, keep it to just the topic, not discussion about what action should be taken. Now, the public can tell you what action you should take. You shouldn't be telling the public what actions you should take, you know. So, if you're ever in doubt on any of these things, think about it and think of openness. Like, think about what is the best thing to do. Either I probably shouldn't be discussing this, so you don't, or I should discuss this open and honestly, or I should say, come to the meeting, we're going to discuss it there. Just never put yourself in a spot where you took what could be perceived as legal action when you weren't supposed to. So it's always be very careful. If you actually think you did have an open meeting law violation, whether it's during your meeting or after a meeting occurred, you can kind of fix it. If you think that maybe something was violated in an item, you can then say, you know, I'd like to go back and reconsider that item. And you can do that during the same meeting. You can just say, you know, we were talking about item 3, and I want to make a motion to talk about that. You know, I want to reconsider that. You can go back and talk about it, and you say, you know, we forgot to mention this. And then you can say whatever it is, and then the board can vote again. You fixed your open meeting law violation if you thought you had one. No harm, no foul. Let's say you go home, and 2 days later you're like, you know, I think we forgot to say something. You can re-agendize it on your next meeting for reconsideration. We have one on our next board meeting for reconsideration. You agendize it as reconsideration of this item. That has to pass. So if that passes, then you have the item listed again. Then you take action again and present whatever other information. You've kind of gone back and fixed your oops. Those are always good things to do. If you think, you know, and even if you're not sure, if you just want to be careful, do it. More openness is better than, you know, not being open if you thought there was a mistake. And again, if you get a complaint or somebody comes or what, you know, be open, be candid, show them your minutes, you know, do what you can. Ratification of items. Do you guys do any ratifications? Like action that's taken and then approved at all? If you do, sometimes our procurement department, if we have a well go down, they have to make a purchase. We have to pay for it. It has to get fixed. They will bring that back at the next board agenda and say ratify the purchase of. It's basically so that the public sees this is what we did. It is allowed because it was an emergency. So then we come back, we ratify, we let the public know it happened. So it's kind of like that. The last part is kind of penalties of what happens if you don't follow the open meeting law. There's several things that can happen. Most of the time initially, you'll get a letter. The ombudsman office will send you a letter, say we got these complaints, you guys need to make sure you don't do it again. It's kind of like a hand slap at first. If it continues to happen, if somebody says, you know, they keep doing this, they're just not getting it, then they can follow up with another letter and they may demand mandatory training where the ombudsman's office comes out and makes you go through their presentation. It's basically this. And then that way they know for a fact, you were here, you listened, and we told you. You still start to get the same complaint. This whole board is just doing this. At that point, sometimes depending on what the complaint is, they may come do training again. They also may start to say, we're now going to fine you. Now, in the beginning, say it's just you that's violating. Technically they're not, but in an open meeting, you continually do it. In the beginning, even though it's just you, they'll do the same thing. They'll write a letter. They'll come do the training. But if the violation every time is solely on you, at some point they'll come and they will sanction you out of your personal pocketbook. It could be $250, $500, $1,000, leading up to them removing you from a board. That's usually a very severe case. Doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen. So just keep that in mind.
You're saying
Again,
violation, do you mean a proven violation? Or
proven violation.
Okay, thank you.
So obviously, people can make a complaint. That does not mean that every complaint, that the ombudsman's office can go back, read your minutes, view your video. If they do not find a violation, then nothing happens. And that's their decision. They are the people who make those decisions. So yeah, so if somebody is saying, hey, I think they violated, okay, they look at it, they may determine there was no violation. Usually they'll correspond with the person who made the complaint and say, we did not find a violation. Sometimes that helps so that if somebody didn't understand why they're doing something, or it helps them to understand that, oh, that's not a violation. No harm, no foul on either side. But if they do say, yes, this is occurring, this is happening every time, then those things will start to be put in motion. And they will. You'll get letters from them. It'll tell them what will happen next. It'll say you have to do this. So again, they also recognize that people on boards, especially like your special district boards, things like that, you guys are volunteers. You know, it's not like you got super hired and you're getting a big fat salary. They understand. Most people aren't going to know all these rules, even if you read them all. Most people, it's very hard because sometimes it's just you're saying something you don't even realize you did it. So this is why they start with, hey, here's a letter, you kind of need to fix this. Or, hey, we're going to come out and do some extra training so we make sure you understand this. So it's not like they're just going to hit you, bam, with this huge $500 sanction right away. That takes a lot of time, and it has to be like blatantly, you just keep doing it. So they do work with both sides. You know, they try to help the public to understand why something is or isn't a violation. At the same time, they want your board to do things correctly and succeed. So they're also going to do things to teach the board, this is why this is a violation, don't do this anymore. So they're very fair on both sides of that coin. So, you know, and that's what they're there for. So, and they're pretty good with that. And there's a whole list of penalties, and it's by statute, and they're all listed in here. But again, it takes a long time to get to the super severe point because they do recognize that. There's volunteers, there's people who are here on their time, and not everybody has time to sit here and read this book every day. And it's such fun to read it all the time. So they do recognize that, and they try to help everybody. So there are also some resources listed in here that can help. There's also another link to the actual legal handbook and a few other things that you can look at as well. And then I also put my information in here. I can answer questions for people about basic open meeting law. So like if somebody from a special district calls and asks, about, should I put this on an agenda? How do you format your agenda? Those kind of questions. I will answer those type of questions. If it crosses the line into legal advice, I will not answer them. That's just, I'm not an attorney, I'm not gonna do it. And then usually, but I will tell you that, I can't answer that. So, but I am there, I do not mind helping when I can. I will answer the questions that I can, so always feel free to reach out. And if I can't, I'll tell you why I can't. So, any questions? I know it's super exciting stuff.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There was any
There's
questions?
no questions?
Oh, I'm to the board. I'm sorry.
No questions?
I'm here to present to them, so, sorry. I didn't mean to ask.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you, and again, feel free to reach out if there are any further questions. Reach out if there are any further questions. So, sorry about that, asking any questions. Okay.